Chapter 141, Neil. Please, get up. Cold. Freezing cold. Minutes after Mia left the protection of the forest and rode the snowbike down the hill, where they'd taken with her car, she felt a deep, bone-freezing cold that was nearly unbearable. Droplets of ice were clinging to the corners of her eyes. Snow was driving into her face, blinding her. Her lips, arms, and legs were stiff. The snowbike sped down the hill and slid sideways, but when she tried to slow the vehicle down, her limbs were so numb that it took a while before her body could obey her brain's frantic command to react. The only thing that wasn't numb from the cold was her sense of fear, the fear that Neil would catch her and prevent her from escaping, and a new, strong fear that if he didn't, she would likely die out here, lost in the blizzard, buried beneath the snow with no one finding her body. In her mind, she made up a vision of a search party in the springtime locating her perfectly preserved remains beneath a mound of melting snow, her body and head still clad in this thick, dark blue snowsuit and her matching helmet, which also went along with the snowbike she rode. A tragic ending, she thought with grim misery, for a girl from the slum of Whispering Way who made it to the social ladder 5 years after her mother's death. Such a story would blow up in the media industry. Far below, through the branches of trees sliding by her, Mia caught a glimpse of the main road that snaked around the mountain, but she would have to jump from here to reach the road in time. If she indeed decided to jump, she would reach the highway in time, but there was no chance she'd ever reach the highway in one piece. Besides, before she could seriously consider going down the face of the mountain, she first had to go through that frozen river. She tried to remember where the river was. It seemed to her that it should be around the next sharp bend in the road, but it was hard to gauge anything when the road had been reduced to a narrow path between snowdrifts. It occurred to her that what she probably ought to do was get off the snowbike and do something to generate some body heat, like running in place or something like that. On the other hand, she was afraid to take the time to do that. If the snow had already filled in her tracks from the garage to the woods by the time Neil realized she was gone, he would automatically assume she was using the road and he'd overtake her much sooner and more easily than if he tried to follow her long way, hidden route through the woods. Mia had deliberately been avoiding looking over her shoulder because she was afraid to take her eyes off the path and risk losing control of the unfamiliar vehicle again, but now that she realized everything depended on how fast the snow was filling in her tracks, she couldn't resist. She stole a swift look over her shoulder and choked back a scream of horror at what she saw. Above and still well behind her, another snowbike was speeding out of the woods and heading down toward the road, its rider crouched low over the front, flying over trees and boulders with what appeared to be an effortless skill. Terror and confusion were quick to overrule everything inside Mia, even the numbing cold. The sight of Neil sent only fear pumping wildly through her veins. Praying he hadn't yet spotted her through the dense trees that lined both sides of the narrow road, Mia looked around for a place to turn off and try to hide so that he would ride past her without spotting her, but there was none. Thus, she kept riding on in full speed to get away from him before he'd spot her. As she approached the edge of the mountain trail, she spotted a big snow-covered rock marking the end of the path, meant to prevent riders from going over the edge. Despite her initial plan to slow down before reaching the edge of the mountain, her nervousness caused her to lose control of the snowbike. She desperately tried to press the brake, but it was too late. The snowbike careened over the edge, sending Mia flying through the air above a dense forest of pine trees. With a horrifying lurch, the snowbike plummeted towards the ground, hurtling towards a cluster of trees and, beyond them, the frozen river lay below. Mia screamed as she felt the bike being ripped away from her by gravity, while she miraculously landed on the sturdy branches of a pine tree, halting her fall. Meanwhile, the snowbike tumbled down the hills, skidding across icy slopes before finally coming to a halt on the frozen river, just before the ice cracked and began to swallow up the bike. Dazed with relief and a little shaky, Mia climbed down the tree that had broken her fall and lay beside it as she watched Neil's snowbike shoot over the edge of the mountain. In pursuit of her, forcing her body to react, she quickly rolled over, staggering to her knees, and crawled under the tree to hide. The skis on his snowbike were airbound and he flew over the mountain swiftly while making a graceful landing. When he rode past her hiding place, Mia crawled further back beneath the branches, but she shouldn't have even bothered, because he never even glanced in her direction. Neil had spotted her snowbike fall off the hills and land on the frozen river before it sank into it, and all of his attention was focused on the sinking snowbike. Unable to completely understand what Neil was doing or accept her own good fortune for still being alive after such a fall, Mia watched him leap off his snowbike before it came to a stop and run toward the river. "Mia!" he shouted. "Mia!" He shouted over and over again into the howling wind, and to her utter disbelief, he started walking over the thin ice of the river. He'd obviously thought she had fallen along with the snowbike into the river, and just as obviously, he should have been glad that she was no longer a complication with which he had to worry. He should be happy that she was dead and wouldn't be able to give away his hideout. Mia assumed he was only walking towards the crack in the icy river to try to recover the snowbike and not because he was worried about her, and her gaze flew to his snowbike he had abandoned at the riverbank. It was now much closer to her than to him. She could get to it long before he could, and, unless he could drag the other snowbike to safety, she could still escape from him without him chasing her. Keeping her gaze glued to his back, she crawled out from under the tree, straightened up, and took a careful step away from her hiding place and then another, intending to sidle from tree to tree. "Mia, answer me, for goodness sake," he shouted, stripping off his jacket. The ice below his feet began to crack and the rear end of her snowbike rose in the air as the machine tumbled into the river and vanished. Instead of trying to reach safety, he grabbed a hold of the branches of a bended pine tree and, to Mia's utter disbelief, he deliberately dove into the icy water to look below it. His entire body completely disappeared into the water, and Mia sneaked to the shelter of the next tree. He broke the surface for air, shouting her name again, then he dove beneath the water again, and Mia hurried to the last tree. Less than 2 yards away from his snowbike and her freedom, she stopped. Her gaze shifted helplessly on the river where he had disappeared. Her mind shouted that Neil Weiner was a murderer who had killed her poor mother, and added to his crimes by taking her hostage, and she had to leave now while she had the chance. Her conscience screamed that if she left him now and took his snowbike, he would freeze to death because he was trying to save her. Suddenly his dark head and shoulders broke the surface beside the submerged tree trunk, and a sob of relief rose in her throat as she saw him crawl out of the water and move himself up onto the ridge of ice. Dimly amazed by his sheer strength of will and body, Mia watched him brace his hands on the ice, push himself upright, and stagger over to the jacket he'd flung off. Instead of putting it on, he knelt down beside it near a snow-covered boulder next to the frozen river. The internal war between Mia's mind and her heart escalated. He hadn't drowned. He was safe for the moment. If she was going to leave him, it had to be now, before he looked up and saw her. Paralyzed with indecision, Mia watched him lift the jacket in his hand. The moment of foolish relief she felt at the thought that he was going to put it on became horror as he did something that was the complete opposite of what she expected. He tossed the jacket aside, reached his hands up, and began slowly unbuttoning his wet shirt. Then he leaned his head against the boulder and closed his eyes. Snow swirled around him, clinging to his wet, dark hair and face and body, while it slowly dawned on her that he wasn't even going to try to make it home. He obviously thought she had drowned trying to get away from him, and he had assigned himself the death sentence as his own punishment. "Tell me you believe I'm innocent," he had ordered her last night, and at that moment, Mia knew beyond all doubt that the man who wanted to die because he'd caused her own death had to be exactly that, innocent. Unaware that she was crying or that she had started running towards him, Mia rushed down the slope to where he sat. When she was close enough to see his face, remorse and tenderness almost sent her to her knees. With his head thrown back and his eyes shut, his handsome face was a mask of pure regret. The cold forgotten, Mia scooped up his jacket and held it out to him. Swallowing past the awful lump of remorsefulness in her throat, she said in an aching whisper, "You win, Ice Cube. I'll go back home with you." When he didn't respond, Mia dropped to her knees and started trying to force his limp arm into the jacket. "And Neil, get up," she cried. Her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs, she pulled him into her arms, cradling his head against her chest, trying to infuse some of her warmth into him, rocking him back and forth. "Please," she cried, on the edge of hysteria. "Please, get up. I can't lift you. You have to help me. Neil, please. Remember when you said you wanted someone to believe you're innocent? I didn't completely believe you then, but I do now. I swear to the heavens. I know you didn't kill my mom. I believe everything you've said. Get up, please, please, get up." Chapter 142, Fear of Losing Him. His weight seemed to be getting heavier, as if he was completely losing consciousness, and Mia panicked. "Neil, don't go to sleep," she said in a near scream. Grabbing his wrist, she began pushing his limp arm into his jacket while deciding to blabber out everything he'd wanted to hear to jar him into consciousness. "Neil, we will go home. We will go to bed together. I wanted to last night, but I was afraid. Help me get you home and I will do everything and anything you want," she pleaded as she forced his other arm into the jacket and struggled with the zipper. "We will make love in front of the fireplace. You would like that, won't you?" When she successfully got him into his jacket, she stood up, grabbed his wrists, and pulled him with all of her might, but instead of moving him, her feet lost balance and she fell down beside him. Scrambling to her feet again, Mia raced to his snowbike and brought it over to where he was lying. Bending over him, she shook him while pleading for him to get up, and when she couldn't wake him, she closed her eyes for courage. Then she swung her arm in a wide arc and slapped him hard across the face. His eyes immediately opened, but then closed again. Ignoring the rush of pain that shot up her arm from her frozen fingers, she grabbed his wrists and tugged, trying to tell him something different that might make him try to get up. For one thing she'd realized, Neil Wayner had decided to end his life here and now, and whatever she did or said, wouldn't move him. He was slowly falling into the darkness. She had to bring him back to the light. I can't find the way home without you," she lied, pulling on his wrists. "If you won't help me get home, I'll die out here with you." "Is that what you want?" "Neil, please help me," she cried. "Don't let me die. I don't want to die. Take me home." It was a second later before she realized that Neil wasn't completely the dead weight he'd been and that he was reacting to something she had said and using what little strength he had left to try to stand up. "That's right," Mia panted breathlessly when he tried to rise up. "Stand up. Help me get home so I'll be warm," she encouraged. His movements were terrifyingly sluggish and when his eyes opened, his gaze was unfocused, but he was instinctively trying to help her now. It took several attempts, but Mia managed to get him to his feet, wrapped his large arm over her shoulders, and got him onto the snowbike, where he slumped over the seat. "Try to help me balance," she said, steadying him with her arms and quickly getting on behind him. She glanced up at the path he'd taken down here, realized it would be impossible to climb back there now. Thus, she decided to follow the frozen river around the bend in hopes there would be a way to get up to the road from there. Her former fear of the unfamiliar machine's power was completely forgotten as she pressed the start button. Mia crouched low over him to shield him from the wind with her body and sent the snowbike speeding over the snow. "Neil," she whispered near his ear, scanning the path and talking to him in a desperate effort to keep him conscious and hold her own fear of losing him at bay. She couldn't imagine losing him because of her own reckless behavior, and she'd do anything to nurse him back to health. "You're still shivering a little. I read it somewhere that shivering is good in such condition. It means your body temperature hasn't dropped to the bottom danger point. Keep shivering," she whispered softly in his ear. When they arrived at the cabin, Neil collapsed 3 times in the hall before Mia managed to get him to her bedroom where she knew for certain the fireplace was filled with wood and ready to be lit. Breathless from supporting all of his heavy weight, she staggered to the bed and gently pushed him onto it. His outer clothes were already stiff and crusted with ice, as she started pulling them off of him. It was while she was pulling off his trousers that he spoke the only words he'd said since she'd run to his rescue. "I want to shower," he mumbled weakly. "I want a very hot shower," he repeated. "No, you can't," she retorted, trying to sound businesslike and firm as she began to pull off his icy underwear while ignoring the blush that rose up her face. "Not yet. People suffering from hypothermia need to be warmed slowly but not with direct heat. I learned that in a first aid class in the university. And don't give a thought to me undressing you. There's nothing new to me about the male body," she lied. "Just think of me as your nurse," she added. "Stay awake, Neil. Listen to my voice and stay conscious," she said as she pulled his black shorts down his muscled legs. Then she glanced down to see how she was doing, and felt a fiery blush heat her cheeks, followed by a warm sensation tingling in her lower abdomen. The magnificent male body that was sprawled out before her eyes looked like a Playgirl centerfold she'd seen in the university years ago. Except that this real-life body was blue with cold and vibrating with deep shivering chills. Without wasting any more time to admire his body or his ominous snake tattoos, she grabbed the blankets and tucked them around his shivering body, chafing them on his skin as she tucked them in. Then she went to the closet and got out 5 more blankets and spread them over him on the bed. Satisfied with his covering, Mia hurried over to the fireplace in the corner and lit the woods. Not until the logs were blazing on the hearth did she stop long enough to take off her own outdoor clothes. Afraid to leave him, she stood at the foot of his bed, watching his slow, shallow breaths as she stripped off her snowsuit. "Neil, can you hear me?" she asked, and although he didn't answer, Mia began talking to him in a mindless string of nervousness intended to both encourage him to recover quickly and boost her confidence that he would recover with her beside him. She had made the mistake of not trusting him. She wanted to right her wrongs by nursing him back to health. It was her fault that he was in such a state. "You're very strong, Neil. I knew that in the past, and I noticed it again when I watched you changing my tire in Novaria and when you crawled out of that freezing water," she whispered. "And you're brave, too. Do you remember Alvin, the boy in the orphanage I told you about? He wants to be strong more than anything in the world. Do you also remember that I told you that I played him a song? Guess what? I played him a song with the same guitar you gifted me years ago." Unaware of the tenderness in her voice, she continued, "I never threw away any of the things you've ever given, not the dresses and not the guitar. Because I couldn't find it in my heart to get rid of them." She trailed off as tears filled her eyes. She'd hated herself for being unable to let go of the things he'd given her. She'd felt disgusted every night she found herself seeking out the only instrument that reminded her of her ice cube, and now she was grateful she'd kept them. Mia smiled through her tears and sniffed. "There's so much I'd like to tell you, Neil," she said brokenly. "And I will, if you'll just stay alive and give me a chance. I'll tell you anything you'd like to know." Panic set into her heart as she realized he didn't react to anything she said. He was lying there like a dead person. If it weren't for the little shivering, she'd believe he was dead. Maybe she should be doing more to warm him or keep him awake. What if he died because of her ignorance? Mia thought in fear. Grabbing a thick robe from the closet, she pulled it on herself. Then she climbed up on the bed and sat beside him while pressing her fingertips to the pulse in his neck. Her gaze shifted to the clock on the dresser. His pulse seemed alarmingly slow. Her hands and voice shook as she smoothed the blankets around his wide shoulders and said, "About last night, I want you to know that I loved it when you kissed and touched me. I didn't want you to stop there, and that's what scared me. It didn't have anything to do with the fact that you have been in prison, it was because I was losing control, and I've never had that happen to me before." She knew he probably wasn't hearing a word she said, and she fell silent as another spasm of deep chills racked his body. "Shivering is a good sign," she said aloud, but she was thinking frantically for something else to do for him. She sat there for a few seconds before an idea suddenly popped into her mind. Jumping down the bed, she rushed out of the room. A few minutes later, she returned to his bedside holding a glass filled with strong wine and a wide smile on her face because she'd heard a very good news on the television in the living room. "Neil," she called eagerly, sitting down beside him and tucking her arm beneath his head so she could lift it to the glass, "drink some of this, and try to understand what I'm telling you. I just heard on the news that your cellmate, Kai Martinez, is in the city hospital. He's not dead and is doing fine. The Martinez's family have sent the best doctors to treat their son. Do you hear a word, Neil?" After several minutes, she only managed to get a tablespoon of the wine into his mouth, and then Mia gave up. She knew she could find her phone he had hidden and call for a doctor, but the doctor would recognize him and immediately call the authorities. They would take him out of here and haul him back to prison, and he'd said he would rather be dead than go back. Tears of uncertainty and exhaustion slid from the corner of Mia's eyes as the minutes slipped past into hours and she sat with hands folded on her lap beside him, trying to think of what to do until she finally resorted to a whispered prayer to whatever God would listen to her. "Please help me," she prayed. "Don't let him die like this without proving himself to the world. Please." Mia drew in a long, shaky breath and brushed away a tear from the corner of her eye, but as she said the last part of her prayer, she was already feeling steadier and calmer. After a moment she looked up at Neil and watched his body tremble with more chills. Then he moved lower into the covers as if to find more warmth. Realizing that he was deeply asleep, not unconscious as she'd feared, she leaned forward and pressed a light kiss to the side of his lips. "Keep shivering, sweetheart," she whispered tenderly. "Shivering is very good in your condition." Unaware that a pair of gray eyes flickered open and then drifted closed again as she stood up, Mia went into the bathroom to take a hot shower to relax her exhausted body. Chapter 143 Decided to Stay. Mia was wrapping herself in the robe after her relaxing shower when it occurred to her that she could at least find her smartphone Neil had hidden and call Rain and Owen to let them know she was safe, so they wouldn't worry about her and send a search team. Stopping beside the bed, Mia laid her hand on Neil's forehead, watching him breathe steadily. His temperature felt closer to normal, and his breathing was deeper now, in the steady rhythm of exhausted slumber. The rush of relief she felt made her knees weak as she turned to add logs to the fireplace to keep the room warmer. Satisfied that he was warm enough, Mia left him to sleep and went to look for the smartphone, closing the door behind her gently. Deciding the bedroom he had slept in was the best place to begin looking, she opened his bedroom door and stopped short, staring in wonder at the incredible luxury spread out before her. Mia had thought her room, with its stone fireplace, mirrored doors, and large king-size bed, was the absolute height of luxury, but this room was 4 times as large and 10 times as lavish as the one given to her. Mirrors lined the entire wall on her left, reflecting an enormous bed with a huge skylight above it and a gorgeous white marble fireplace opposite the bed. One thing that caught most of her attention was the ceiling. It had an illusion of a gray, gloomy sky that looked so real. As Mia walked in, she felt the soft black carpet beneath her feet. Her eyes soon fell on a small button next to the mirrored wall. Curious, she pushed the button, and to her surprise, the mirrored wall slid open, revealing a spacious bathroom with marble floors, double sinks, and luxurious showers and tubs. What surprised and shocked her at the same time was the fact that the bathroom was so spacious it was divided into 2 with a glass center. Each side had its own sink, its own enormous shower, and its own tub with gold fittings. As Mia stared at the 2 divided bathrooms, 3 things occurred to her at the same time. One was the fact that the bathroom was exactly the modern bathroom built for married couples, and the other was the fact that one of the bathrooms had a feminine touch to it. And lastly, she realized Neil had brought a woman here before from the line of feminine, half-used shower products in the glass cabinet. Swallowing the lump of jealousy that rose up to her throat at that realization, Mia walked out of the bathroom and headed for the door to the walk-in closet that was already left open to look for her phone. After a thorough and exhausting search of both the closet and all the drawers in the bedroom, Mia gave up the search and instead gave in to the temptation of borrowing one of the female dresses she'd seen in the woman's closets next to Neil's. It was a one-piece red dress with a silky, expensive fabric. She chose the dress partly because it was sure to fit her and partly because she had a helpless urge to look nice if Neil woke up before morning. Though for the past years she had bought beautiful dresses, she'd never gotten one as sexy and elegant as this red one. It had long sleeves, with its waistline hugging her tightly, and a long slit, revealing her long legs. Mia was pulling the zipper, wondering where on earth he had hidden the phone, when she remembered that there was a small closet in the hall, the one with a deadlock on it. She went straight to it and tried to turn the knob, and when it proved to be locked tight, she tiptoed into her own bedroom. She found the key where she expected it to be, in the pocket of his soaked trousers. The locked closet contained an enormous stock of wine and liquor, and on the cabinet, she found her phone laying there where Neil had hidden it in plain sight. Not wasting any more time, Mia took the phone into the living room, plugged it on the charger, and sat down on the sofa, her legs curled beneath her. She had already dialed Owen's number when she realized the enormous mistake she was probably making, and she hastily tapped on the end screen to disconnect the call. Since kidnapping was a federal offense, and Neil was an escaped murderer, it stood to reason that the military and the authorities would probably be close to Owen, waiting for her to phone so they could trace the call and get to Neil. At least, that was what always happened in the movies. She had already made her decision to stay here with Neil and to let destiny handle whatever came along, but she absolutely had to talk to Rain and reassure her. Throughout all these years, Rain had stood by her side like family. They'd done everything together. Thus, it was only natural that she'd be worried sick about Mia. Not to mention Rain was going through her recent heartbreak with that jerk, Max, and Mia had promised to be there for her. With a satisfied sigh, Mia dialed Rain's number and, to her relief, Rain picked up on the first ring, and her worried voice rang out through the phone. "Oh my goodness, Mia. Is that you?" "Yes, Rain, it's me." Mia didn't realize how happy she was in hearing Rain's voice, until she felt the wetness on her cheeks. "Where are you? Do you have any idea how worried everyone is about you? Owen has not rested ever since the day you disappeared. Gosh, are you all right? Tell me where you are and I'll inform the military." "No," Mia exclaimed, startling Rain on the other side of the phone. Gentling her voice again, she said, "Please don't tell anyone that I called you. Keep this a secret." "A secret? Are you with Neil Weiner? Is he threatening you to stay with him?" Don't you dare hide anything from me, Mia. We have to get you back to safety. The entire world is thinking you are his accomplice. Rain, Mia interrupted her worried rambles. Yes, I am with Neil. But trust me when I tell you that he's innocent of all the crimes he'd been accused of. She assured, I am safe, he's not keeping me against my will. And I want you to know that I'll come home when I see fit. What? Mia, I don't believe a word you say. Have you lost your mind? Rain burst out. That man is a psychopath. Mia didn't hear the rest of what Rain said. She was already switching off her phone and putting it away and blinking back tears of sorrow and uncertainty. For a moment she'd forgotten that she'd been engaged to Owen, and hearing that he was worried to the point he hadn't slept made her feel more guilty at the fact that she'd chosen to stay with Neil. Moreover, by telling Rain that Neil was not keeping her against her will, she had inadvertently forced her to assume that she was Neil's accomplice. Shaking off the depression settling over her, Mia reminded herself that Neil was innocent and that was what really mattered right now. Helping an innocent man to stay out of prison was not immoral or illegal, and it was not a betrayal to her poor late mother. Getting up, Mia added wood to both fireplaces, put the phone back in the closet, then went into the kitchen and spent the next hour cleaning up all the mess Neil had made. Then she decided to make a delicious stew to warm him up when he awoke. She was cutting up potatoes when she realized that if he knew she had made a phone call, she would have a difficult, if not impossible, time convincing him that her friend, who was also the sister of his rival, was trustworthy and wouldn't tell the authorities nor her brother she'd called. Since he already had enough to worry about, she decided not to tell him. Finished with the cooking, she wandered into the living room and sat down on the sofa, the television still on so that she could hear if there was more news that would interest Neil. It was funny, in an awful ironic sort of way, she thought with a faint smile as she stretched out on the sofa, staring up at the ceiling. All the years she'd spent hating on Neil Weiner for not just breaking her heart, but for killing her mother, and now she was praying for his fast recovery in a lone, huge cabin in the middle of the mountains. For the past 5 years, she'd lived a lonely life despite being surrounded by lots of fans who looked up to her. She'd had sleepless nights trying to look for ways to be successful, to clean her name from Neil, yet today, she was willing to let go of everything she'd worked hard on to be with him. Just months ago, she'd envisioned a loveless marriage with her childhood best friend, where she'd imagined having his children, who would grow up knowing their mother never wanted their father because she fell in love with a man responsible for their grandmother's death. Those thoughts had always made her feel like the worst woman to ever grace the face of the earth. She had always been tempted to break off the engagement due to those thoughts, but because Owen was a nice man who'd loved and took care of her when everyone turned away from her, she'd thought she could put up with everything and make him happy. Now, as she thought about her past and her chaotic present and uncertain future, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In all these years, she hadn't stepped out of line once because she didn't want her fans in the whole wide world to think badly of her again. Now that she was about to stray from the path they'd made for her, she knew there was no way to ever clear her name unless Neil's name was cleared and the real culprit was caught. However, if Neil's name never got cleared, Mia thought wryly, her decision of staying with him was going to violate not only moral principles, but probably the laws of their country. And while she would be staying with him, the entire news media would be providing gossip about it for the entire world's entertainment, just as they were already doing, dragging her name along with Neil's to the mud. Mia looked somberly at her hands where her ring finger was now empty because she'd removed Owen's ring after her shower. She'd made a silent decision to give it back to him if they met again. She knew he'd be heartbroken and she hated the fact that she would be the reason, but Neil was innocent of the cold-blooded murder he was accused of, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was expected to do something about it to prove that to everyone and restore his name again. Rolling over onto her side, Mia tucked her arm beneath the pillow, watching the flames leaping in the fireplace. Until the real murderer was discovered, no one in the world, including the people she considered family, was going to condone anything she did from now on. Of course, once Rain and Owen also realized that Neil was innocent, they'd approve completely of everything she had done and might yet have to do. Well, probably not everything, Mia thought. Owen wouldn't approve of her falling in love with Neil again, if what she felt for him was actually love, and he definitely wouldn't approve of her sleeping with him. With a mixture of quiet acceptance and nervous anticipation, Mia realized that loving him was actually out of her hands. Sleeping with him was already a foregone conclusion unless he had drastically changed his wishes since last night. Although, she rather hoped he'd give her a few days to know him better, to know him more than she knew him before. Beyond that, all she could do was try to guard her heart from needless pain and to refrain from doing or saying anything that would make her even more vulnerable to being hurt by him than she already was. She wasn't an utter fool, after all. Long before Neil had gone to prison, he had lived in an elite world of luxury populated by glamorous, sophisticated people, where he could do as he pleased with no one pointing a finger at him. She'd read enough about him in articles before he went to prison to know that the man she was with in this secluded mountain house had once possessed fabulous homes and villas of his own, where he attended lavish events with elite people and international business tycoons. Not to forget the fact that even the president had been willing to pay and give anything to be able to meet the infamous Neil Wayner. He was the world's mysterious man nobody had been able to figure out, but as destiny had brought them together now, she wanted to be able to do so. Chapter 144. Thank you for saving my life. As the moon peeked out of the winter night sky, its glow mingled with the dancing, falling snowflakes and illuminated the cozy, huge house nestled in the mountains. It was after 11 p.m. when Mia woke up with a confused start, a sofa pillow clutched to her chest on the sofa where she'd fallen asleep. A slight movement off to her right caught her attention, and she quickly turned her head at the same time. An amused male voice remarked, "A nurse who abandons her patient and falls asleep on duty does not get paid." Mia's so-called patient was standing with his shoulder propped casually against the fireplace mantel and his arms crossed over his chest, watching her with a lazy smile. His hair looked damp, as if he'd just come out from a shower. With his brown shirt that was open at the throat and his casual home trousers, Neil Wayner looked incredibly handsome, completely recovered, and very amused about something. Trying to ignore the treacherous leap her heart gave at the sight of his mesmerizing, intimate smile, Mia hastily sat up. "Your cellmate, Kai Martinez. He didn't die," she told him hurriedly, wanting to put his mind at ease about that immediately so he wouldn't end up wanting to kill himself again. "The doctors his family brought say he's going to be all right." "I heard that," he assured. "Well, you did?" Mia asked cautiously, but it occurred to her that he might have heard it on the television while he was dressing up and she was asleep. If not, if he remembered her telling him that, then it was embarrassingly possible he might also remember the other things she'd said in those unguarded minutes when she thought he was beyond hearing. She waited, hoping he would tell her that he'd heard it from the television, but he continued watching her with that smile tugging at his lips, and Mia felt her entire body grow warm with embarrassment. "How do you feel?" she asked, hastily standing up. "Better now. When I woke up, I felt like a potato being baked in its own skin." "What? Oh, you mean the bedroom got too hot because of the fire and warmer?" she asked, realizing her mistake of forgetting to check on him. He nodded. "I kept dreaming I had died and gone to hell. When I opened my eyes, I saw the fire leaping around me, and I was pretty sure of it because of the intense heat." "I'm sorry," Mia said, anxiously searching his face for any sign of lingering ill effects from his exposure to the heat. "Don't be sorry. I realized very quickly that I couldn't really be in hell." He joked light-heartedly. His light-hearted mood was so contagious and so utterly welcoming that she reached up to lay the back of her hand against his forehead to test his body temperature without realizing what she was doing. "How did you know you weren't in hell then?" "Because," he said quietly while looking down her face with a gentle expression she hadn't seen on his face since they'd gotten here, "part of the time, an angel was hovering over me." An involuntary blush was quick to rise to her cheeks, but she covered it up with a small laugh. "You were obviously hallucinating in your condition," she joked. "Was I?" he breathed. This time, there was no mistaking the husky timbre in his voice that sent little butterflies fluttering in her stomach, and she quickly pulled her hand away from his head, but she couldn't quite free her gaze from his silver eyes. "Definitely," she whispered softly. From the corner of her eye, Mia suddenly noticed that an ornament was turned the wrong way on the mantel beside Neil's shoulder, and she impulsively reached out to straighten it. Then she rearranged the two smaller ornaments beside that one. "Mia," he called in a deep, velvety voice that had a dangerous effect on her heart rate, "look at me." When she turned to look at him, he said with quiet gravity, "Thank you for saving my life." Mesmerized by his tone and the expression in his eyes, she had to clear her throat to stop her own voice from shaking. "Thank you for trying to save mine, too." Something stirred in the depths of his silver eyes, something hot and inviting, and Mia's pulse tripled even though he didn't attempt to touch her. Trying to switch the mood to one of a safe zone, she asked the first question that came to mind. "Are you hungry?" "Why didn't you leave?" he asked instead of answering her question. Neil's tone of voice warned her that he wouldn't allow a change of subject until he had gotten answers, and she sank down onto the sofa, but she looked at the centerpiece on the table because she couldn't quite meet his searching gaze. "I couldn't leave you out there to die, not when you'd risked your life thinking I had drowned." She noticed that two of the white silk artificial flowers in the centerpiece were bent at awkward angles, and she obeyed the automatic impulse to lean forward and fix them. Neil's eyes followed her actions of fixing things for the second time, but he went on to ask, "Then why didn't you leave after you got me back here and into bed?" Mia felt as if she were wandering through a field filled with rose thorns. Even if she had the courage to look at him and blurt out exactly how she felt about him, she couldn't be certain that her confession wouldn't backfire on her face. She couldn't be certain how he'd react and if he'd even acknowledge her feelings. "For one thing, I honestly didn't think of it, and besides," she trailed off not knowing what to say, but then she added, "I didn't leave because I didn't know where the car keys were." He raised a suspicious brow before saying, "They were in my trouser pocket, the same trousers you took off me." "Actually, I didn't think of looking for the car keys. I suppose I was simply too worried about you to think clearly at that time. Don't you find that a little odd given the circumstances you ended up here with me?" He persisted, adding to her nervousness. Mia leaned forward and picked up a pile of old newspapers that were lying half off the table and laid them fully on the table. Then she moved the crystal bowl of silk flowers 2 inches to the left, to the center of the table as she spoke. "Everything has seemed pretty odd for the past few days," she said cautiously. "I can't begin to guess what would be normal behavior in these circumstances anymore." Standing up, Mia began straightening the pillows she'd disarranged during her nap on the sofa. She was bending down to pick one up from the carpet when he said in a laughter-tinged voice, "That's a habit you have, isn't it, rearranging things when you feel uneasy?" "I wouldn't say that. I'm just a very tidy person." She stood up and looked at him, and her composure slipped toward laughter as she noticed his dark brows were raised in mocking challenge and his eyes were gleaming with amused fascination as he waited for her to admit that she was uneasy. "All right," she said with a helpless little laugh, "I admit it. It's a habit of mine. I rearrange things when I'm nervous or angry." As she finished putting the pillow where it belonged, she then added with a rueful smile, "Once, when I was nervous about failing an exam in the university, I reorganized everything in the halls of our apartment building in whispering way. Then I began to mop the floors. I didn't stop until evening when my mom came to stop me." His eyes laughed at her story, but his voice was puzzled and solemn. "Am I doing something that makes you nervous now?" Mia laughed anxiously, then she said with a lame attempt at seriousness, "You've been doing things that make me extremely nervous for the past few days we've been together." Despite her scolding tone, the way she was looking at him filled Neil with so much tenderness. There was no trace of fear or suspicion or revulsion or hatred anywhere on her lovely, expressive face, and it seemed like a lifetime since anyone had looked at him like this. His own uncle and subordinates hadn't really believed he was innocent. Mia did. He would have known it just by looking at her, but the memory of her words at the river, the way her voice had broken when she said them, made it 1,000 times more meaningful. "Remember when you said you wanted someone to believe that you're innocent? I didn't completely believe you then, but I do now. I swear to the heavens. I know you didn't kill my mom. She could have left him to die at the river, or if that was unthinkable at that moment, she could have gotten him back here, then taken the car keys from his pocket and called the authorities from a phone booth on the way as he'd taken her phone. But she hadn't, because she really believed he was innocent." Neil wanted to pull her into his arms and tell her how much that meant to him. He wanted to bask in the warmth of her smile and hear her contagious laughter again. Most of all, he wanted to feel her mouth on his, to kiss her and caress her until they were both wild, and then to thank her for the gift of her trust with his body. Because that was the only thing he had to give her now. He knew she sensed a change in their relationship, and for some unknown reason, it seemed to be making her more nervous than she'd been when he was holding a gun on her. He knew that just as surely as he knew they were going to make love tonight on his bed and that she wanted to almost as much as he did. Mia waited for him to say something or to retort at her last jibe, and when he didn't, she stepped back and gestured toward the kitchen. "Are you hungry?" she asked for the second time. And he nodded slowly, but her hand stilled at the husky intimacy she thought she heard in his voice when he said, "I am starved." Mia told herself very firmly that he had not deliberately chosen that particular word because it had been used during their quarrel last night in a sexual moment. She cleared her throat, trying to look innocent of all such thoughts as she said very politely, "What would you like to eat?" "What are you offering tonight?" he countered, playing verbal chess with her with such ease that Mia wasn't at all certain if all the double meanings to their exchange existed only in her imagination. "I was offering food, of course," she said. "Of course, you were," he solemnly agreed, but his eyes were glinting with amusement. "Hot soup, to be specific," she said. "It's important to be specific," he replied, his gaze never leaving hers for a second. Mia decided to make a quick retreat from the strangely charged conversation and began backing away toward the counter that separated the kitchen from the living room. "I'll prepare a quick dinner and serve the soup over there on the dining." "Let's eat here by the fire instead," he suggested, his voice like a soft caress over her skin. "It's comfortable and cozier." Chapter 145. Take her to bed tonight. "Let's eat here by the fire instead," he suggested, his voice like a soft caress over her skin. "It's comfortable and cozier." Cozier. Mia's mouth went dry as her mind made up another meaning to that word. In the kitchen, she was finding it hard to concentrate, because her hands were trembling so hard she could hardly ladle the hot soup into bowls. From the corner of her eye, she saw Neil walk over to the home system, where he flipped on a button and spoke to the device to play a song. A moment later, Ed Sheeran's song, "Perfect," filled the room. From all the songs in the world, he'd chosen "Perfect." The lyrics swirled around in her brain in the kitchen. She reached for 2 napkins, put them on the tray of food, and then, with her back to the living room, Mia braced her palms on the countertop and drew a long, steadying breath. She didn't have to be told to know that he was trying to make her relax before he'd take her to his bed tonight. She knew it, just as clearly as she knew that the situation between them had changed irreversibly from the moment she chose to stay here with him rather than leaving him at the river or bringing him here and calling the authorities. He knew it, too. She could see the evidence. There was a new softness in his eyes when he looked at her and a smiling tenderness in his voice, and they were both utterly shattering to her self-control. Mia straightened up and shook her head at her foolish, useless attempt to deceive herself. There was nothing left of her self-control, no more arguments that mattered, nowhere she could go to hide from the truth. The truth was that she wanted him so badly. And he wanted her as much. They both knew it. Mia put silverware on the tray, then she quietly stole another glance at him over her shoulder, but she hastily looked away. He was sitting on the sofa, his arms spread out across the back of it, his foot propped casually atop the opposite knee, and he was watching her in a relaxed, indulgent, and sexy manner. He wasn't going to rush her, and he wasn't a bit nervous either, but then he had undoubtedly made love many times with countless women, all of whom she was sure were much prettier and unquestionably more experienced than she was, which was why he'd looked calm. Mia controlled her compulsive urge to suddenly start rearranging the kitchen, and picked up the tray instead. Neil watched her return to the sofa and, bending down, placed the tray on the table, her movements graceful and uncertain, like a frightened kitten. The firelight gleamed on her heavy brown hair as it spilled forward over her shoulders. It glowed on her soft skin as she arranged the bowls on the mat he'd spread on the floor next to the fireplace. Her long, sooty lashes cast fan-shaped shadows on her smooth cheeks, and he noticed for the second time that she had beautiful hands, the fingers slender with no engagement ring, and that, for some reason, filled him with delight. He had a sudden faint memory of those hands of hers clasping his face to her chest at the river as she rocked him in her arms and pleaded with him to get up. At the time, it had seemed like a dream in which he had merely been an uninvolved observer, but later, after he staggered into bed, his recollections were clearer. He remembered her hands smoothing blankets over him, the frantic worry in her lovely voice. As he looked at her now, he marveled once again at the strange aura of innocence about her. Then he suppressed a puzzled smile at the realization that, for some reason, Mia was avoiding his eyes like a little shy virgin. For the last 3 days she had opposed, defied, and challenged him, and today, she had outsmarted him and then saved his life when he'd given up. And yet, for all her courage and her spirit, she was amusingly shy, now that the hostilities between them were over. "I'll get some wine," he said, and before she could decline, he got up and returned with a bottle and 2 wine glasses. "I didn't poison it, Carita," he remarked a few minutes later when he saw her reach automatically for the wine he had poured in the glass, then pull her hand away as if afraid. "I didn't think you did," Mia replied with a self-conscious laugh. She picked up the glass and drank some, and Neil noticed that her hand was shaking. She was uneasy about going to bed with him, he could tell. She knew he hadn't been near a woman in years. She must be worried that he was going to jump on her the moment they were done with their meal, or that once they started making love, he'd lose control and finish in 2 minutes and not give her pleasure like her fiancé must have been doing for the past years he was in prison. Neil didn't know why she should be concerned about all that. If anyone should be worried about his ability to pleasurably prolong the act and perform well after 5 years of being deprived, it was him. And he was. In the past he wouldn't have worried about his performance in bed, but now he was. He was, in fact, worried that she'd find him boring compared to that son of a bitch, Owen. He'd even turned on the music to make her relax, even though he wasn't a fan of music anymore. Neil decided to try to reassure her by engaging her in some sort of pleasant, casual conversation. Mentally, he tried to search for a topic of interest to her while he reluctantly discarded the subject of her beautiful body, her gorgeous eyes, and, most reluctantly of all, her whispered statement at the river that she wanted to go to bed with him. He also remembered all of the other things she had said to him in the bedroom this afternoon, when he hadn't been able to shake off his numb paralysis and respond. Now, he was almost certain he wasn't meant to hear most of them. Or else he had only imagined some of them. He wished she would talk about her time in the orphanage. He loved her stories about children because that was the only time her entire face brightened up. He was about to try to get her to talk about them, when he realized she was giving him an odd, curious look. "What?" he asked. "I was wondering," she began, "that day, I mean at the restaurant when we met, did I really have a flat tire or—" Neil struggled to suppress his guilty expression as he replied. "You saw it with your own eyes. Are you saying that I ran over a sharp object and didn't realize my tire was going flat?" She raised a suspicious brow. "I wouldn't say it happened exactly like that." He was pretty certain she suspected him now, but her face was so bland that he had no idea if she was playing cat and mouse with him or not. "Then if you don't mind, Mr. Weiner, I'd like to hear from you how you think I ended up with a flat tire?" "I'd say that the side of your tire probably came into sudden contact with a sharp, pointed object," he said with a casual shrug. Finished with her soup, Mia leaned back and fixed him with a level look that would have shamed an instant confession and apology out of any stubborn male child. From the young woman he'd known 5 years ago, she looked so mature, to the point he thought she'd make a good mother and a good discipliner to her children with that look on her face. "A sharp, pointed object," she speculated, lifting her brows. "You mean like a knife?" "Like a knife," Neil confirmed, trying desperately to keep his face expressionless. "You mean your knife?" she asked. "Yes, my knife." With an impenitent smirk, he continued in a boyish voice, "I'm sorry, Miss Harrison." Raising her brows, she said firmly, "I'll expect you to fix that tire, Neil. And reflect on your bad behavior." The only thing that stopped him from laughing at that moment was the sweet shock of hearing her finally say his real name to his face. "Yes, ma'am," he said. It was unbelievable how his entire life was in chaos, and all he wanted to do at this moment was laugh and pull her into his arms. Laughter, Neil thought, was like a taboo in his life before, and now sitting here with her made it more natural than it was to him before. "I don't have to write an apology letter, do I?" he asked, watching her huge brown eyes shimmer with answering amusement as she looked pointedly at the bowl he had just pushed aside. "No," she said, "but you're grounded tonight. And the entire house chore is on you, including the dishes." "Oh no," he replied, but he stood up obediently and picked up his empty bowl. As he reached for hers, he added, "You're so mean, ma'am." To which she firmly replied, "No whining, please. Go do your work." Neil couldn't help it anymore. He burst out laughing. He then turned his head and surprised her with a quick kiss on her forehead. "Thank you, M.I.A.M.O.R.," he whispered, holding back another chuckle at her flustered expression. "F for what?" He stopped laughing and held her gaze as he said, "For making me laugh. For staying here with me and not turning me in. For being brave and funny and incredibly beautiful in that red dress you're wearing underneath your robe. And for making me a wonderful meal." He lifted her chin to lighten the mood a split second before he realized the expression in her shining eyes wasn't embarrassment. "I'll help you with the dishes," she said, starting to stand up from the mat. Neil put his hand on her shoulder and gently pressed her back down. "Stay there and enjoy the fire and the rest of your wine. I'll do it myself," he said, then headed to the kitchen. Too tense to sit still, waiting to see what would happen next, no, when it was going to happen, Mia got up and walked over to the glass wall. Crossing her arms against her chest, she gazed out at the snow wonderland with mountaintops gleaming in the moonlight to distract herself from what she knew was going to happen between them tonight. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Neil, who noticed her standing by the glass wall, pressed something on the wall, dimming the lights on the chandelier above the living room to a mellow glow. "You'll be able to see outside better that way," he explained when she threw a questioning look over her shoulder at him. And, Mia thought, it was also much cozier with only the dimmed lights and the glow from the fireplace to illuminate the room. Very cozy and very romantic, especially with the music playing in the background.